Well, hello, friends. Trisha Goyer here, and I am excited to talk about an amazing biblical fiction novel, Ahoti, a novel, and it's the story of Tamar. From the first page, I just fell in love with this book. It just made me feel like I was there, which I think is so important with the setting, especially with biblical fiction, to bring the Bible alive. So we have two wonderful authors here, but first I'm going to introduce my friend Eva Marie Everson, and then she's going to be able to introduce her friend. So first of all, welcome.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Tricia. Love to be back.
Yeah,
And
so why
yes,
don't you just start? Yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself first, Eva Marie.
oh, well, I am the CEO of Word Weavers International, which is one of the largest, if not the largest, international critique group. The director of Florida Christian Writers Conference. I've been at this writing thing for about 25 years now and have somewhere between 45 and 48 books out right now. I honestly lost count at some point, so
Wait,
I'm going to have to sit
Yeah.
down and refigure that, but it's not really that important to me. I am just so excited, though, about this novel that is coming out next week on the 14th,
Woohoo!
written with my good friend Miriam Feinberg Vamosh, who lives in Israel. And I met Miriam in 2002. I was a journalist in Israel, and Miriam was the guide and oftentimes interpreter for us on a Women of the Bible tour. There were six of us
Mm.
journalists who were there. I was representing crosswalk.com, and we have had a fast and furious friendship ever since.
that's right.
Awesome.
Very
So yeah,
true.
Miriam, tell us a little bit more about yourself. I'm just, I mean, I just love that friendship started
Yes.
there, and then, but I would just love to hear more about you too.
Oh, well, I come from Trenton, New Jersey. I was born in Trenton, New Jersey, and I came to live in Israel in around 1970. I spent a year of
Okay.
high school here and fell in love with it, and went back to finish high school in Trenton, and then came here to live. Um, Most of us come and go a little bit, so I had some in between times elsewhere, but mostly I've been here ever since. I was a full time tour guide, tour educator for about 40 years. That's
Mm.
how I met Eva Marie. And my specialty was guiding Christians. The year that I spent in high school, I went to a church school because there was no other school where they were teaching in English, and I didn't know Hebrew except for the prayers. And
Mm.
they instilled in me a love and respect for the New Testament and for Christians that served me well because one of the classes we took was in New Testament. Everybody took it, and it was an international community of all faiths. There was even a Zoroastrian there, but we all took the New Testament course. And so I learned so much, and I was able to build that kind of a feeling which I had to share with other Christians, to share with Christians about the places where Jesus walked and the disciples. And then, as time went on, I started getting more and more interested in writing. Um, I wrote as a teenager, Eva Marie, but I thought it was just hormones.
I love
Yeah,
that.
I wrote
They
these
help.
mushy poems and things.
Yeah.
But people said, "Oh, you could be a writer, you know." But I said, "I don't think so." But anyhow, I ended up being asked to write a series of books about daily life in Bible times. So the big one was daily life at the time of Jesus, and then there was food in the
Mm.
Bible and women in the Bible, children in the Bible days. And in the middle of all that, I wrote another novel about an archaeological find. And I also worked for an Israeli daily paper called Haaretz. I worked for them for 20 years as a translator from Hebrew to English. And I have my late husband and I have two daughters, two wonderful son-in-laws, and five the second most gorgeous grandchildren in the world.
Oh, I
We'll
love
fight over
that.
that later.
I know. Well, I have some pretty cute grandkids too, I will
Yes,
have
that's
to
why I
say.
said the second or the third most. I can't
Yeah,
Yeah,
tell you.
yeah,
exactly.
right. Yeah, it's a
Okay, so
juggling act.
Yeah.
it is. Okay, so I would love to hear how this novel came to be. But first of all, let me just say, I can tell, I mean, of course, you live in the Holy Land and then you do tours because it just felt like it was so alive with the scents and I mean, just talking about the different spices and I know
Mhm,
she's a healer.
mhm.
I was just like got goosebumps. I'm like, oh, this is so real. It just felt so real to me. So, how did this novel come to be?
Well, if I can like interject a little bit about the
Yeah,
Tamar of the Bible, and then let Miriam tell the story of how this book happened.
absolutely.
What there are three Tamars in the Bible. The
Hmm.
first one is the daughter-in-law of Judah.
Right.
The second one is the daughter of David, and the third is the daughter of Absalom, who was the
Hmm.
second Tamar's whole brother. They had a lot of half brothers, but he was her whole brother. And she has a very tragic story that we can find in Second Samuel of being uh, the interest, if you will, of
Mhm.
their half brother Amnon, which of course was a
Session.
deviated type, you know,
Mhm.
sexual interest. He devised a plan to rape her and was successful at that. And then a couple of really odd lines are in the scriptures conversation between Absalom and Tamar, which stood out to both Miriam and me and Daisy, apparently. and uh, and so the door kind of shuts on Tamar being told by her brother Absalom, "Don't tell, and just go into my house," and it
Mhm.
shuts the door. But we know that her story had to have gone on from there. And this is where I'll let Miriam pick it up.
Thank you. And thank you for that, Eva Marie. I was vaguely familiar with that story from my Bible reading and studying, but not in any deep or particular way until I was writing the children's book, Daily Life of Children in the Bible, and the scientific advisor I found, Professor Meir Bar-Ilan is his name. He's a renowned scholar of the Bible and the Talmud here in Israel. I found him online because he had a special interest in children, and so I cold called him and asked if he would be interested in advising me on how to do this children's nonfiction book. And he helped me a great deal, gave me literature to study and many suggestions. And when the book finally came out, he leaned over to me at the launch dinner and said, "I have a story to tell, and I think you're the one to tell it." And it
Mm.
turned out that Professor Bar-Ilan had come across in the 80s a manuscript, an ancient manuscript that was in the Cambridge University Library that had originated in India and perhaps was brought to India by the Jews of Yemen, who themselves brought it from the Holy Land, perhaps. We always say we don't know
Yes.
exactly, but it's
We
very
don't know.
possible. And in the early 1800s, a British clergyman who was the head of the Anglican Church in India became interested in any documents connected with the 12 tribes. And so he went down to Cochin, in India, where this document was held, and he discovered that and other documents. And the Jewish community of Cochin apparently gave it to him, and he brought it to England, and that's how it ended up in the Cambridge University
Wow.
Library. The document is called "The Words of Gad the Seer," and that's mentioned in the Bible, 1 Chronicles 29:29. That's an easy one to remember, where it says, "And there's more to tell," and it's in the book of Gad the seer and another couple of manuscripts. But
Nathan
we
the
thought,
prophet. Yeah.
thank you, we thought that
Yeah.
it was lost.
Mhm.
Everybody thought it was lost, like so many of the other things. So once this was found, and in the 80s, Professor Bar-Ilan was the first person to do a very extensive deep dive into this manuscript, what it does in the Jewish tradition is comment on Bible stories. The anonymous author, Gad the Seer, has commented on several different Bible stories, among them Tamar, or Tamar, some people call it.
Yeah.
And this anonymous author picks up the story where Eva Marie said the door closed. He opens that door. He opened that door and he told an entire story about what happened to Tamar afterwards. And that was the basis for our plot about where we took Tamar from the time of her victimhood to the time of her victory, as Eva likes to put it.
Yeah, I love that so much. And what I love is that, so many people, well, first of all, there's the people that say, oh, the Bible's not true, or it's just made up stories. But I did a novel last year on Esther, or Hadassah. And there's so many other countries, or, you know, at that time, that had records of these stories, the biblical stories, the same. So we think of like, there's just the biblical stories are the only stories about it. No, like you said, there's other manuscripts. I was reading about the Greek's version of the story of Esther or Hadassah. I mean, there's all different versions of different stories. And I love that it just proves that these biblical texts, of course, are true, but also there's other continuations of, because we just get these short little snippets of the stories. And I
Exactly.
think with David, I mean, the focus so much of David's life is to show the progression of when he
That's right.
sinned. You see this, the sin is in his home and it's going to continue in his home. And you see the downfall of from his sin coming and that's kind of what the Bible is highlighting. But
Yes.
each of these children have stories. Each of these other people have stories. And I love that you're like, ooh, here's this manuscript and let's continue on with this story.
Yes, yes. And one that is not, it doesn't leave the reader going, oh my gosh, that poor woman, but instead says, oh, look at the redemption in her life and look at what she was able to do even after this horrible thing happened to her. She moved on and continued to grow as a woman. And of course, that's very important to us as women.
Yes.
And the fact that her niece was named after her, she
Mm-hmm.
must, the influence. I mean, I think it's so easy to just look at this biblical story and maybe have pity, but I love that you have given her voice and you've
Mm-hmm.
given, I guess, even the culture of the time and what was happening and sin and hardship, but God can still prevail even when we are victims, even when we are facing the pain of other people's consequences. So just give us a highlight, either one of you, of the story. I mean, definitely go buy the book. It's so well written, so beautiful. But just give us an overview, a highlight of a little bit about her story to give us a taste of that.
Okay, I'll start
Okay,
and
go
even
ahead, Mary. Yeah, yeah.
throw in whatever is worthwhile adding.
Okay.
Um, the story begins with the Bible, with the Bible verses that Eva mentioned.
Mm,
But according to my research, the story was not so simple. There's intrigue in the
Mhm.
story that's not obvious unless you dissect every single word and every single letter in some cases. And
mm,
so it's the intrigue that spurs the story on, because it's suggested that Absalom had more to do with Tamar's rape than we're led to
mm.
believe by the words in the Bible as we have them. I don't want to reveal too much,
Yeah.
but um, that not only was there a conspiracy suspected that Absalom was involved in, because Absalom wanted to be king in the worst way, literally, and he did everything he could to make that happen, including the eventual killing of Amnon, which is also in the Bible. But behind that lies a whole political intrigue, palace intrigue, that comes alive thanks to the scholars who have dissected it before us. And so that's where things start. And Tamar is forced to leave the palace eventually, which the Bible doesn't say what happened to her after she closed the door. What, she never went out again ever? And but she did. She was forced to leave. She disguised herself. She moved through the country with her beloved governess, or her nurse, Mara,
Mhm.
a woman who is the fruit of our imagination. And she goes through many places in Israel, which I know well from having been there many times, always in disguise until eventually, dot, dot, dot.
Just up. Yeah, dot, dot, dot. Yeah.
You have to read the book.
Yes,
You have to
yes.
read the book.
Yes, you must read the book because it all catches up,
Mm-hmm,
eventually. And it's one of those things where we don't start at the end, but we start near the end, and then we take you back about 15 years
mm-hmm,
to the rape and the morning of the rape, actually. And we know from the scriptures that David called her in and said, "Your brother is ill. Make a special cake for him and take it to him." So we know all of that from scripture, and so we kind of take it, where she is being awoken by Mara, and your father wants to see you, and of course taking it all the way through. But then that trek that she makes, and it's not just a physical trek, it's a spiritual trek, and it's an
mm-hmm,
emotional trek, and it's a healing journey for her. And then we bring it back, and by the time we get to the end, David is no longer king. Absalom is no longer alive. Joab is no longer alive. And Solomon is now sitting on the
mm-hmm.
throne. So the little brother that she
The
left
little
behind
brother.
is
Yeah.
struggling.
I love,
Yeah,
yeah, the first time she approaches the king, there's Bathsheba, and then little
yeah,
toddler Solomon, and it's
little
fun to
toddler
see
Solomon.
them
Yeah, yeah.
in those, like, because we have the whole scripture to read, right? We know the whole well, we think we know the whole story. We know the biblical story. There's so much more of the story we don't know.
Mm-hmm,
But to see these people, these real people, like there's a little toddler or the nursemaid is holding, and see them walking through life and
mm-hmm,
approaching, just even the gown when it talked about the multicolored dressing gown she had, and reminding her of Joseph's many colored gown.
mm-hmm,
And this is not a good thing. This is
Yeah,
not a
mm-hmm.
good
yeah.
thing
This
sometimes
is not.
to have the,
Yeah,
like, all these elements. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
okay. So it's one of those books I'm not like I'm gonna just sit down and read through it like quickly, because it's like, oh, I like this description. Oh, I never thought about that before. And
Yes.
and
That's
that's
yeah,
what I love
yeah,
about
tremendous.
biblical fiction, because
yeah.
it is so true. And I was just reading this morning, in King David. It was near the end of his life,
Mm.
when he was giving all his riches back to the temple, and the gold and the silver. And I was thinking, this is the shepherd boy. This is what was going through my mind. This
Mm-hmm,
is the shepherd boy that was just with the sheep, had no idea what God had in store for him. Like none
mm-hmm,
of us do.
Yeah,
Greater than he imagined, but also more heartbreaking than he
mm-hmm,
imagined. And
mm-hmm,
to know that his children, I mean, Absalom for many years at the gate was trying to get the favor of everyone in town. And so as I'm reading, I'm like, oh, like all the biblical stories and all the times I've read the Bible comes back to me like, oh, I can see,
yeah,
oh, okay, this makes
yeah.
sense. And I love that. I love that it's fiction, but it's
Yes,
also, you just didn't sit down and like
truth.
make up this whole story out of nowhere.
mm-hmm,
You have
Yeah.
these biblical background, these records, the knowledge of the area, the knowledge of biblical history,
mm-hmm,
these sources that are very true to life, which
mm-hmm.
is the best. And for years, so I've written three biblical fiction novels so far. And for years, I'm like, I'm never going to write one, because it just seems like
Daunting.
well, it is
It is
daunting, and then
daunting.
you
Yeah.
you want to make sure you get it right. And
Right.
Yes.
so
Yeah.
I know, I'm sure there's things I did not get right, but the fact that, I mean, you, more than anyone, Miriam,
Hmm.
walk these hills, like,
Hmm.
to put it that way. And I love that. So
Mm-hmm.
as you sat down, what was important to you, to make this story come alive? And we'll start with Miriam first, and then Eva Marie.
Well, the things that I love to do because of my studies, and
Mhm.
also nowadays I'm involved mainly in translating and editing for archaeologists, historians. Um,
Mm.
uh, I just got an assignment to translate a pamphlet about spices in the desert that the Bedouin use for healing. So, I had access to all these things. And for
Mhm.
example, talking about the details, the idea of Tamar with her robe, her special robe. There are scholars who believe that the special robe was a sign that she was had a special function in the court. What was that function? People say different things, but that she she prepared a special cake, as Eva Marie just said.
Mhm.
And the word in Hebrew for that cake is a word that's connected to the Hebrew word that means health. And so, from the idea that Tamar was in charge of making this cake with her own hands, that she knew, that David knew, that she knew what to put into that piece of food to heal Amnon. And so from that, we assume that Tamar is a healer. And I love all that stuff that the
Mhm.
scholars have been able to dig up for us or assume. So what was important to me was to get the details right. And I consulted many scholars. There's one of the places that Tamar spent several years is a place called Abel. It's mentioned several times in the Bible. It's in northern Israel. And I interviewed the archaeologist there, Nava Panitz Cohen, about there was something that I wanted to say. I thought I saw it in her writings about copper smelting or something that she just mentioned, and I said, "Oh, you found a copper smelting thing there, installation?" She said, "Well, I did write that, but now we're not sure." And I said, "Well, is it okay if could there have been?"
Could
Yes,
there have been?
yes.
And she said, "I suppose so." So that's how that got in the copper, the metal smelting that I put in there. And then I had a person, a PhD historian, read it for accuracy and correct everything. So I'm pretty sure I got the details right, and that's what I loved being able to do.
Mhm.
And Eva Marie, I'm going to let you take over in just a minute, but what Eva Marie was able to do for me was to make connections between one Bible story and another. That I hadn't thought of because I'm so busy with the details that I, what kind of spices she put in the thing and how
Yeah.
long it took to grow. And so I thank Eva Marie for that, and I'm going to let you continue, Eva.
Well, for me, it was crawling into their skin and getting the emotional details correct. And so there were times when Miriam and I would meet via Zoom. We were looking at a particular chapter, two chapters, three chapters, however many chapters that we had been working on. And I would say, okay, well, slow down for just a moment. So let's crawl into her skin or let's crawl into his skin. What would the emotion be? What, or if like adding things like if they were hungry, if they were tired. And so, as a fiction writer predominantly, that's what we do. We crawl into the skin of the characters and try to make it as realistic as possible. And
Mhm.
then, as Miriam was saying, we have a little joke between us because Miriam spent so much time studying the New Testament as a Jewish woman. I spent so much time in my theological studies as a Christian studying the Old Testament. So the joke has often been that, if you have a question about the New Testament, ask Miriam. And if you have a question about the Old Testament, ask me. And we have laughed about that for years now.
Yes.
Um, but I would go, oh, wait a minute. Isn't there a story about, and then
Mhm.
we'd start digging into that and realizing there were these connections. So even right down to this has a very similar sound to what
Mhm.
happened to,
Mm.
as we say, Dinah, who was the
Mhm.
sister
Mhm.
of the 12 boys of
Mhm.
Israel, of Jacob.
Simeon and Judah, I think was,
And Judah,
yeah.
yes,
Well,
yes,
mhm.
yeah. And so, I mean, she was the half sister of the rest, and so on and so forth. So, as I say, uh, yeah, Jacob and his four decisions, and
Yeah.
so it has such a similar ring to it, although
Mhm.
it ended differently, quite differently.
Mhm.
And so Miriam said, "Oh, I think I know where we can insert this," and so she hears that, Tamar
Mm.
is introduced to that story along the way. And that's part of her healing is
Yes.
knowing you're not alone.
That is so beautiful. I love so much about this. First of all, I love anytime, like, so I think so many times we just read the Bible and we think it's boring or it's just facts. And when we could bring things to life, and well, David's story is one of my favorite, not just story, his life, because he's such an emotional person. And when we read the Bible chronologically and we could tie in the Psalms to the
Mhm.
times he was writing them, and
Mhm.
he's like, I am but a worm and not a man, or any of these very emotional things, which
Yeah.
now, because I've read through the Psalms with my teenagers, and it's all drama. I'm like, it's okay to be
All
dramatic.
drama.
David was dramatic, but what did he do? At the end of it, after he complained, after he was sure he was going to die, he's like, but yet I will praise you. And he turned it back to God. And like,
Mhm.
drama and emotions are okay.
Mhm.
And so I love that in fiction, we can do that, and
Mhm.
we can see the drama, we can see the emotions. These are real people facing
Mhm.
very difficult situations. And if we
And
can
that
bring
was,
hope and healing, yeah.
yeah, that was something that we discussed too, was um, the familial dynamics that
Mhm.
go all the way back in David's life. The relationship that he had with his brothers, with his mother, with his father. I mean, if you think about it, David is basically cast aside. And
Mhm.
so when Samuel comes and says, one of your sons is going to be the next king and I need to anoint him. No, not this one. No, not this one. No, not this one, and then gets to the last one and it's like Cinderella's slipper.
Yeah.
Is there no other son? And well, there's one out in the field,
Oh,
I
Yeah.
mean, he's just
He's
so
out there
like,
somewhere. Yeah.
he's out there somewhere. And so we started talking about, okay, how would that dynamic then have altered him as a father? And the
Mhm.
fact that he married so many different women, and the reason that he married so many different women, and did he get a big head at some point, and yet he did this thing with Bathsheba, and even worse than that was what happened to her husband because of his
Yeah.
decisions, because of David's decisions. And Nathan the prophet said to him, you're going to pay for this.
mhm.
And then unfortunately what we see is the children are the
Mhm.
ones also paying that price.
Mhm.
And we uncovered that slowly all the way through, because even though Tamar is no longer in the palace, news gets to her along the
Mhm.
way. And it's heartbreaking. It's truly heartbreaking. But at the end of it all, there is this redemption that
Mhm.
is a beautiful, slow process. And it's almost bone chilling at the end because you're not really sure what's going to
I'm
happen to
not at the
her.
end yet.
I
Don't
know,
tell
I know.
me.
I'm not going to tell you what happens. Yeah.
But it's so true. I mean, we see David covering up his sin. And I
Mhm.
wonder, as his children start just going and doing all the things they're doing, like he almost felt like he couldn't discipline them or guide them because he had tried to hide his sin and cover
That's
up for
what.
himself.
That's what
Yeah.
Eva
Mm.
has a wonderful point about that. I don't know if you want to go into it, but Eva was able to make a connection between
Mhm.
David's sin. Can you talk about that a little bit
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
concubine?
absolutely. So we know in the scriptures that Absalom,
I
runs to
love that.
David and says, Amnon did this thing to my sister. And it says David was very angry, but he didn't do anything.
He didn't
And
do
I
anything.
said to Miriam, and I were talking, and I said, well, Miriam, how could he? How could he say anything to his son about this thing when he is standing there with the wife of another man and the second son, because the first one died because of their
Mhm.
sin? How is he ever going to say, well, never mind what I did?
Mhm.
And then Miriam got into I guess maybe the Levitical law, I guess we call it the
Yes,
Mosaic law,
yes.
some of those laws about
Right.
if a woman is raped in the city and if a woman is
Mhm.
raped in the country and if it's our
Mhm.
household and all of this, which, Tamar, if you look back at the things that she said to Amnon before the rape, she knew. She was well versed and she
Yes.
knew what the rules were. And then
Mhm.
Miriam wrote this in about David questioning Gad and Nathan. Well, what do the
What
scriptures
should
say?
we do?
Yeah, because he's trying to backpedal. He's
Right.
trying to get out of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, right, by looking at the scriptures, and, of course, we didn't have the Bible then, but we certainly had the the scriptures, the manuscripts, the scrolls in some form or other. As we don't even know exactly what the format was in those days, but
Mhm.
we can certainly presume that the Levitical laws were known in
Yeah.
Judah. That's what they were supposed to live by. And so that's where I had David opening up the scroll of Leviticus, which I not mentioned by name, obviously, and finding out about the laws and deciding what to do. And it
Yeah.
was tremendous for me. I like to call Eva a Talmudic sage because the Talmud has endless stories. Uh, the Talmud is more than anything else. It's a commentary on the Bible that taught us
Mhm.
how we should live, or the rabbis were using it to teach us how we should live, the ancient sages. And so, just like a modern day preacher, they would go into a story and they would say, what does this mean for us today? They would ask themselves, or their disciples would ask them, well, what should we do if that happens today? And the sages would each give their point of view, and sometimes they went off in these long tangents about this character, that character, how we came across David's mother. David's mother's not mentioned in the Bible
Mhm.
except as the mother, my mother, I think, in the
Yeah.
Psalms. But her name isn't mentioned, and the sages were sitting around one day uh, shooting the breeze, and they said, none of these Bible characters have names of their mothers. We really need to see what names we can figure out for them. And they said, well, this one was called that, and this one was, they just made it up.
Just made it up.
Wow.
Although my Orthodox brethren believe that every single word in the Talmud is also the word of God. So I
Mm.
would never say that to my Orthodox cousins, for example, that
Mhm.
my
Mhm.
real Orthodox cousins, that they made it up. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
they found a wonderful name for David's mother, and we were able to put that into the story. And
Mm.
so Eva is able to do that kind of thing. She's able to look at the big picture and draw out of it things that normally we wouldn't think of going together. And that's when you say, Tricia, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That was Eva's wonderful contribution that I'm
Thank you.
still in awe over.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, and so what I love about this book is its entertainment. I mean, it just reads, you're just walking with these characters, but I also feel like I'm learning, but I'm also understanding the Bible, which I'm like,
Mhm.
bonus. I mean, when you pick, I love historical fiction anyways, but this
Mhm.
biblical fiction is even, I don't know, even deeper and more important of
Mhm.
understanding. So, and, I love that we can read a novel and be entertained, understand the story at a deeper level, but also when we go back to our Bible, I think we will also
Yeah.
understand our Bible
Mhm.
at a deeper level too. So it's entertainment and it's
Yeah.
also
Right.
education, but not in a boring way. So let's just put it
Good.
that way.
Well,
Yeah, yeah. And that stopping again long enough to say these were real people. They
Mhm.
had real lives. They had real emotions. They had real heartaches and this and that, and so one of the things that I love about being associated with this book is this reminder that women, even though we're called the weaker sex, we're not. We have
Mhm.
always had to be strong, and we have always endured, and we have always found the path. Whatever path we needed, we have always found it. And if you go back and you really look at the Bible and you really study some of these stories where women are interjected, and sometimes that's the way it feels, like they're just thrown in. Oh, and then
mhm.
but there's an underlying strength in every single one of them
Yes.
that you just think, wow, look at what she endured, and
Mhm.
look at how she handled this, and those are fun conversations to have.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, yeah,
Oh, so good. Okay. The novel again is Ahoti. Did I say it right?
Yes,
good.
Ahoti.
Yes, you
beautifully.
did. Yeah, yeah.
But Miriam, you got to say it because you say it so much more beautifully than I do.
Ahoti.
Yeah.
Ahoti. It has a little
Yeah.
guttural in there.
And what does that I know
Oh,
what
of
it means because
course.
I read it.
Yeah.
But
It means
what does the title mean?
it means my sister.
Mhm.
And that came about. I'll just say that also is thanks to Eva. Eva liked for me to interject Hebrew words in the
Mhm.
story, and I often said, she would say, "Well, what is that in Hebrew?" And I'd be, "Well, what difference does it make? The book is in English." And Eva would say, "Well, we love to learn the Hebrew words, and in
Mhm.
fact, people refer to each other probably more than by name, by their relationship. So
Mm.
Absalom would say to Tamar, Ahoti, which when we talk to our siblings, we normally, my brother and I do. He says, if I call, he says, "Oh, hello, Ahoti." And I say, "Hello, Achi." But
Mhm.
we just do that in parroting the Bible, but not naturally, just for fun. But that's the way they talked about each other. So Absalom would say, "Ahoti, my sister." It comes up in the book, and it was Eva's idea to give that the title,
I love it. Oh,
"My
so good.
Sister."
Okay, so yeah, where can we find more information about your book?
Eva.
And definitely go and purchase this, everyone. Like I know I say that, but no,
Everyone read
really, really
it.
this time you're gonna love it.
Thank you.
Yeah. I appreciate that very much, and excuse me for this awful cough that I have. Um, but yes, you can go to any of the online stores like Amazon, ChristianBook.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Books a Million. Any
Mhm.
of those type of online bookstores, Walmart.com, etc. If you are wanting to order like for a brick and mortar store, go to Paraclete Press. I believe it is paracletepress.com. Our publisher is Paraclete Press, and we specifically through their imprint called Raven. And I just have to throw in that they have just been absolutely wonderful to work
Yes,
with. I have so enjoyed
me
my
too.
time working with them. Just that was a blessing from God
Yes.
that we
Hmm.
ended up with them. And then of course, yeah, I don't have an online store, and neither does Miriam, I don't think.
I
But you
do.
can
You
find
can
out more.
order.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, yeah. You can
Okay, so
order
you
the
can
book
find
on
out
my
more there.
website. Hmm.
Yeah, MiriamFeinbergVamosh.com, and mine is
Hmm.
Eva Marie Everson Author.com. Make sure you got to throw in that author. And of course, go to the brick and mortar stores because we want to
Mhm.
support them as well.
Yes.
Um, and if they don't have the book, ask them to order it. That's what it's all about. And your local
Absolutely.
library as well.
I was gonna throw in those libraries. I tell the people
Mhm.
if they don't have money to buy books, I'm like, go ask your library to
Go
order it
ask
because
your
then
library. Yeah,
many, many people
absolutely.
will get the chance to read it. Yes.
Yes,
Well,
yes.
ladies, thank you so much for being here.
Thank
I love
you.
the book.
Thank you for having us, Tricia.
It's been I love that first of all, thank you for the time and the attention that you gave to this. It's so important and it's so beautifully done. But thank you for being here also.
Thank you.
Thanks.